Hi everybody, it's Jackie G. Welcome to Art Talk Tuesday. So glad to see you all again. It's only been a week. Although if any of you came to check out and join us at the USK Toronto on the weekend, it was so much fun. We were one of the sponsors. All the urban sketchers and to meet so many of you that came down once I did my live. So as you know, what we try and do is to have guests so we can have guests and chat, and that way you get to know about our suppliers, the manufacturers, different products. And if you have questions, this is a great way. So you don't have to look on the internet, you don't have to check out, you don't have to find out information that may not be useful at all. This is your opportunity to ask a question from someone who's from the inside. So Jimmy and I had spoken, and Leslie is our guest today. I promised that I wouldn't say anything about him except that he is demo artist extraordinaire. And if you have any questions, this is your opportunity to ask questions. We're going to be chatting about Winsor Newton watercolors. And I am sure Jimmy can tell you more of a history than I can, but from as far back as I can remember, Winsor Newton was one of the top choices of watercolors on the market. It's been recommended by, oh my gosh, demo artists and teachers all over the world for years, and it's still considered one of the top manufacturers of watercolors. And so today we're going to talk about all the ins and outs of watercolors and gouache, and Jimmy's got all kinds of things he's going to share with us. I asked Jimmy to put together a little bit of a bio because, as I say, I don't want to mess it up. I'm just going to refer to him as demo artist extraordinaire, and I'm going to let Jimmy take over. Now, before he does get to chat, because I promised that I'm going to moderate and let Jimmy do the chatting, we have posted that we do have a prize. So Winsor Newton has been extremely generous in giving us this prize for this talk. There will be a question, and I'm going to explain how it is won. We do want you to win, but we also want you to participate. We want you to ask questions. So when we pose the question, and you'll get to hear the answer, what's going to happen is, and I'm going to read it because I don't want to make a mistake. There's going to be a story, so we're going to post a story on Instagram afterward. You're going to have to answer the question and put your answer in, and you'll be submitting your email, and then it's going to be random choice. You have to have the correct answer in order to win, and then we'll be in contact with you. This can be for North America, so if you are, watching us from United States, we'd be more than happy to share it with you as well. Of course, we wish luck to all our Canadian viewers, but we'll leave it at that. I do want to wave and say hi to everyone before we get started because I always forget. And again, if you have any questions, any comments, type them in. I do have staff who are going to try and moderate. And of course, Jimmy, demo artist extraordinaire, is going to see most of them, and he'll be able to answer it while we're going. So welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun for me to get to do. I love demo artist extraordinaire. I'm going to make sure that this recording is heard by my family, and henceforth, we'll see if that's how they refer to me. I don't think so, though. So yeah, Jackie, you're right. The history of Winsor Newton goes back a long time. Now, back to 1832, as a matter of fact. Now, to keep my bio brief, I don't go back that far. I've been with the company about 15 years. I am a painter. I started out the first half of my career as a college art professor. So I taught painting, drawing, art history, all in the States. So hi to my friends up in the north. I am in New Jersey, and I'm coming to you from my studio, which is a converted space behind my house, which is really nice. So I work here part of the time, and then in our offices in New Jersey for Winsor & Newton and our sister brand, Liquitex. And what I do for the brand is I'm the resident artist and the director of education. So I'm going to share something with you. We're going to kind of go back and forth from my work surface to me when I'm talking to you, and I just want to share with you down below here. Obviously, right now, I'm going to get you a little bit closer. We're on Instagram here at Gortzman, so you know that. Clearly, we're here. Winsor and Newton is where you can find all sorts of interesting information about the brand. And I show you this too because I just mentioned TFACNA. That stands for the Fine Art Collective North America, and that is the education program I run for the brand. So we also do live streams, so you can follow all those. And likewise, I'm Jimmy Leslie Art. That's me. That's my shameless plug. So you can check out my work there and my sketchbook work and so on. So yeah, I mean, that's my brief bio. Obviously, we could get into it a lot more. One of the things I get to do, though, is get to give product demos and run the team of artists in the Fine Art Collective who also do that. And for me, I started out as an oil painter. That was primarily what I did. That's what I did in graduate school. And sometimes working for a brand like Winsor & Newton, where we have watercolor, oil, acrylic, people will often ask me, well, what's your favorite medium? And I wouldn't be so melodramatic as to say that's asking me like which kid is my favorite. It's not quite that. But I think it's about where I am in my life as an artist. Now, clearly, I don't know, Jackie, I don't know what everybody's you don't at the moment either know everybody's background who's watching at the moment. So I want to just kind of share a general statement for you all. Back when I was a college professor, my schedule was much different than now working for the brand. And what I mean by that is I might, on a Tuesday like this, I might teach a class in the morning and have nothing going on in the afternoon and be able to focus all my time in the studio here. So that lengthy amount of time really allowed me to work with the slow drying medium of oil because I had so much more time. Now my chunks of time are more like this working. However, I find that I still get a huge amount of work done because most of the work I do now is in watercolor and it's opaque cousin gouache. Easy to set up, easy to clean up. There's not all the other, there's not that many mediums as you might find with oil or acrylic. So I still will vacillate to those other mediums sometimes when I have a bigger block of time. Or let's say I want to work very, very thickly, which is not conducive to watercolor or gouache. But I still want things to dry fast. That's where I might gravitate towards acrylic. So if there's any of you tuning in, and maybe this is your first time hanging out with Jackie and of course me here on Art Talk Tuesday, maybe you're new to painting in general and you're thinking, wow, which way do I go? Watercolor sounds intriguing. That would be my thing, that you can kind of narrow things down and think about where you are in your life, how much time you have, and how that makes sense. Does that make sense for your viewers, Jackie?
Makes sense to me. I
yeah,
mean,
okay.
it's very, very true from what I've seen in the past few years. And I think it happened, I would say COVID also really changed the way I found our customers and viewers were looking at watercolors. I found that they weren't as afraid of trying watercolor. It's become more of an accepted medium where you don't have to be worried about it. And not everybody puts everything behind glass. There's so many new ways to use it and hear it. Same thing with gouache. I think it's amazing to see the rediscovery of gouache and then acrylic gouache and just being able to embrace that opaque watercolor without knowing that you have to go to an acrylic in order to get the same effect.
Yeah, I mean, I can confirm what you're saying too from a brand perspective with Winsor & Newton. I think during COVID, we definitely saw a resurgence of watercolor and particularly gouache. And you mentioned Urban Sketchers, a super popular medium, and that's because it's great to take on the go. And I'll share a little bit from my sketchbooks in a few moments. And why I like it for that purpose. I was just traveling last week. Just for pleasure with my family, and I've got my little kit with me. So I've got a few kits here, and if you think that's worthwhile, Jackie, I'll share those little kits with everybody. One of them, of course, does have, and I'm gonna just open this one kit, and then I will show it to you. One of them does have the little field box kit that Jackie mentioned at the top here. Yeah, that's what it looks like, pristine. And then I'm gonna open mine, which is less pristine. And then this little palette flips. This other little one flips like that. And then on the end, there's a little tab there. And the cap that goes on, that just, let me flip that around. that slides on just like this. So you've got your little place for water, you've got your palettes and so on. And mine's, mine's kind of messy because it gets used, although some of these have been swapped out recently, so they're quite full. And that's a fun little kit. Let me do this, Jackie. Let me actually show a sketchbook, and we'll go back and forth with that. But let me do that because I think there's some points that are salient in doing so. So I'm going to flip back down to my surface,
Sure.
everyone. And we'll come back down here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, actually, I'm going to raise you up a little bit. This is a little old Army surplus bag. I was not in the service, so I'm not sure what was carried in here originally, but I'm going to take that little kit again. I'm going to fold it back up. Just goes like that. You got the little brush there that comes out. Sort of like, I love these kits too, because here's a little water carrier.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the little brush. And I feel like it's sort of a James Bond kind of funky sort of MI6 thing there. If you're a Bond fan, everything just kind of fits in its own neat little place. And these are great for travel with the airport, no restrictions. But I have had TSA go, "What is that thing that you've opened that up for us?" And they're very curious. So that goes in my little kit, right? So this is just a snap. So this thing, just to show you, size of my hand, a little bigger than that. This can always drop in a backpack for me, folks. So I can pop out that kit. I've got my little watercolor book there, a sketchbook with, I usually have like a fine liner in there. Here's another Winsor Newton fine liner that I have. I've also usually got this other little palette that I just kind of keep if I need to, have extra space. Just a piece of plastic. You can get all sorts of things like that. And then what I don't have in here, but I'll pull from my desk here, is just a little mechanical pencil if I want to sketch stuff out. And then what I like about, I think I bought this thing in a surplus store for $5 maybe. In the side, I keep a few tubes of gouache, which we'll get into, a little kneaded eraser. I think the other side, yeah, I can, boy, that's about 6 tubes of gouache in this whole thing that I can keep. So that's really, really cool. And then, of course, what I can do, this is my most current sketchbook, and I'll just show you a few things. I can pop that open. This was a little sketch in gouache. So if some of you are not familiar with gouache, if you're new to painting, and that's an odd term, Gouache, and sometimes people refer to it as gouache, doesn't matter. You do you on that, tomato. And then when we open this up further, I'm going to go to some of the last pages. Let me do that, because as I said, I was just away last week. So just with watercolor and just with pencil, I had some very gray skies in a place called Lake Copac that I was staying at. And I wanted to do this fast sketch. I had about 5 minutes. My wife was saying, "Hey, dinner's going to be ready. I'm cooking something on the grill." And I'm like, oh man, I wanted to paint. So I just did this real quick. And then when I had a little more time, I came back and I actually created, and this is a tall one, so I'm going to raise my camera up there a bit. I've got this done in watercolor and gouache, and actually a little bit of, I don't know if you can see this, a little bit of pastel pencil in there as well, to get this very gray, stormy, cloud type of landscape, as opposed to the next day being at a place called Bash Bish Falls on the border of New York State and Massachusetts, and being able to deal with more full color. And so what I love about this is you can see down here, very loose watercolor. And when you get here for highlights and other opaque areas, I'm using, again, that cousin to watercolor. I call it a cousin to watercolor because it is still the watercolor family, but it's opaque and dries very matte. That all makes sense, Jackie? I'm going to flip back around here.
It does. I think we actually had a question.
Oh, good.
Someone was asking, she said that Heather says that she works wet. And does it keep the colors from running into each other after you've closed it? I think that's the case that you were showing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So let me open that again. I should probably leave it open. I have no reason to close it up. Yeah, what happens, Heather, I think that's what Jackie said, Heather.
Yes.
Yeah, what happens here, it depends on how wet you get in here. I mean, it can certainly run a little bit if it does. But if you do that, if you find that the next time you open it up and you've got it like that, you can always take one of your brushes. And if you got a little, let's say you've got a little blue in, oh, I'm going backwards, in the red right here, you can always wet that, just pick that up, dab that off to the side on a piece of paper towel, whatever you have, rag. You're going to be good to go. And I also see at the same time here, Ruth is saying, does gouache dry as quickly as watercolor? Yeah, Ruth, that's a great question. Or sorry, it's not Ruth, it's Nuth art, I think. It does, you can get a little bit thicker with the application of gouache, so that'll slow it down a touch, but it's negligible. It's negligible. But you bring up a really great point, and I'm so glad you asked that question. So I'm going to flip you back down to my surface. Before I do, I'm just going to reach off to the side here. I want to show you something that I have here that illustrates this point. So again, back and forth here. We're going to come down to this surface. And I've got a bunch of things here. And what I want to show you, yeah, is this. Okay, so I've got a very thick application of gouache that I've placed on here. Overly thick. The one thing, when you're using gouache, it is not a medium to be used in an impasto method. That is a thick application that we can do with a palette knife like acrylic or oil. The way that we get, and if I grab my tube again, I'm going to show you. This would be a Winsor and Newton tube of gouache. This one happens to be permanent white, as opposed to what our watercolor tube looks like. So when our chemists create the formula for gouache, what they do is they try to pack as much pigment in that as they can compared to the binder, that's the glue essentially, if I use a layman's term, that holds the pigment in place. Yeah, there you go, Jackie. That's absolutely it. So we have gum arabic right here, and I also have some hunks of gum arabic in its raw form. So this is basically a sap that comes from a tree called the acacia tree, areas like the Sudan and so on. And if I put it back in this little cup right here, I'm going to take some water, and I'm going to dip a little water on my finger, just a little bit, and I'm going to press it down like that, just a second, and you can see how that sticks. And if I'm going to shake this at the risk of making this thing fly up and hit my screen, I'm shaking this thing, and it is really on there, but boom, easily off as well. So it's water soluble. This is the binder, and here it is in liquid form of both watercolor and gouache. So they share that. That's why they will re-wet. So if we take this little example of this overly thick, there's two things I wanted to show you. One, I get some more water on my finger. That'll happen. That's not going to happen with acrylic. That is not going to happen with oil. And this can be tricky for people when they first start using watercolor or gouache. As they layer over, a color might bleed. Now, you can exploit that and beautiful things can happen, but you can also have a situation where you're like, I didn't want that to happen. I wanted a stroke to lay over the other and have those two things combine nicely. That's where what I would do is a little test sheet like this. I think, folks, here's what happens, and I'm going to, just to make this point, I'm going to come back here face to face. I find a lot of times, and I find this with myself, listen, I've been a painter for 30 plus years. I find I come in here in the studio and I have it in my head, it's the studio. Now, this is a dedicated studio space. It doesn't matter if studio is your basement, your dining room, it's your studio. And if you're using the materials, you're an artist. I used to tell that to my students. Yeah, I would walk into a class, I said, don't call me professor. I'm not going to call you student. We're going to call each other artists. Only difference I have is I've been at it more and longer than you are. That's it. And I'm going to share things that can help you. So this is one of the things I would always tell my students, and I will say in demos still to this day. I come in the studio and it's expectations in my head. I must make art. This is my studio. I come to here to make art. But I think it is imperative that you also take time to play and learn on your own. And I think that can be very useful when you come into whatever your studio space is and you go, I'm not feeling it today. Okay. So just tinker around and try something like this, and we'll get you back down closer again. So what I did, and you can do this, this is watercolor or gouache. I happen to use gouache here. Doesn't matter, watercolor or gouache. Put a strip down, lay a flat wash down. So that's the orange there. I want to say I used, doesn't matter. I think I used a phthalo blue. Doesn't matter. But what I did here is I took the paint with hardly any water, just kind of out of the tube, and dragged it across there. So you can see it's a very dry brush technique. And you can see no paint has, smeared. Nothing's happened there. Then a touch more water, a touch. Do it again. Okay, I'm good. A little bit more water, maybe 3 parts water. Okay, that's still good. I'm seeing layering here, the transparency, and I'm seeing sort of a brownish, right? Because we have the complementary color of blue and orange. But down here, no problem. Still, no problem. Starting to mix a little bit more. I get over here. Oh yeah, I'm getting into issues there if I don't want blending to happen. So this can be a great way, because if I was teaching a class and you said to me right now, let's say you said, Jackie, you and I were painting together, and you were like, Jimmy, how do I know what's too much? It's not a recipe, right? I cannot simply say to all of you, well, 1 part water to 1 part paint over another layer is not going to cause you effects. Your 1 part water may be a lot more than my 1 part water, even though that seems like a simple ratio, right? So this can be a great way to test. Now, let me go back to that yellow swatch.
Okay, hold on one second. We had a lot of questions and comments that came in, so I want to try and catch up, because it makes me think about things that I want to ask you too.
Let's do it.
So you were talking about gouache. Now, my understanding is, and I want to make sure, is that you really shouldn't dilute gouache too much. The whole idea is that it's supposed to be an opaque coverage, correct?
Yes and no. Okay. I hate that saying yes.
I mean, well, I know that the whole idea behind gouache, it is supposed to be opaque, which means it covers the paper.
Correct.
Watercolors are generally a transparent color,
Yeah.
so they're going to look different. And my understanding always was that if you break down your gouache too much, then you're sort of losing the purpose of the actual paint.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few things there, Jackie. Yes, you're right. So here's the thing. In Winsor Newton, we call our gouache designer's gouache.
Yes.
That's because when we go back to the 1930s, and when it was created, 1937, when that was created, what happened was, or not what happened, what was going on at that time, we didn't have all this technology we have right now. We had no computers. So designers, illustrators needed something that dried fast. Gouache does it. It needed to be opaque so they could layer. Did that, right? Because because that fast part is key, right? If you're painting an illustration in oil, you got to have the thing dry before you can shoot it and then send that off to be a magazine cover or an ad.
Right.
Third thing, and this is what gouache does as well, and you're right about this, Jackie, is that it dries very matte. That's wonderful for shooting your work and not getting the glare that oil and sometimes acrylic can have. Now, further to your point, Jackie, yeah, if you want to layer gouache and get those beautiful opaque coverage and you dilute it too much, you're going to lose that. You're going to lose that. And the whole point about transparency, I want all of you to kind of keep this in mind. If you go to, if you're like if you're on the Winsor Newton website, let's say, and you were looking at watercolors, you will see information about the pigments. You'll also see information about opacity and transparency. And you might say, well, what are you talking about? Why would you need information about opacity? Watercolors are transparent, sort of. Watercolors, we often think of all of them as being transparent because we put them down in these thin washes. We dilute them. However, some pigments, cobalts, cadmiums and some others are actually much more opaque. So you can get more coverage, never to the degree and opacity of gouache. And even with gouache, you'll see opacity variation. So I want you to think about it this way, everybody. Generally speaking, watercolor, yes, very, very transparent. And generally speaking, gouache, very, very opaque. You can have little variations within there. But Jackie's 100% correct. If you start diluting gouache to the point of watercolor, you lose its gouache-like characteristics,
Yeah.
which is probably what you picked it up for in the first place.
Exactly. So someone did ask also, can you dilute gouache, or can you dilute it with oxgall, or is there something else you would recommend?
Yeah, there's two things. And you picked up that bottle of gum arabic before, and I also have the oxgall. So we both have that. We're like dueling things here. So what happens with those? I want you to think about this, everybody. Gum arabic is the binder. I showed you that crystallized sticky form over here, which is actually used coatings in candies and things like that as well. When you have gum arabic in its liquid form, it's a bit viscous. It's a bit viscous. So if you're trying to control the flow of the water a bit that you're using because you don't want areas to blend, you can use, and you only need just a few drops in your this looks like it's an old dirty container, but you could just put a few drops in there, 2 or 3 drops, and that'll help control that flow if that's something you want to do. Now, I'm the kind of person, I like the flow. I want it to flow more. And oxgall, what the oxgall does is this promotes the flow even more. And you might say, well, why? I mean, water flow, what would you do that for, Jimmy? That doesn't make any sense. Because what'll happen if you dilute too much with water, you lose some of the brilliancy of the color, some of the saturation. Oxgall will help retain that and get that to really move. So these are things to play with and try around. Are they absolutely necessary? Do you have to use them for your practice? No, you don't have to, but they can provide some really interesting contrast for you. So that's a nice thing. I would highly suggest, again, mention, following everybody here. And so if you're following Gwartzman's here on the Instagram and other social media, if you see an in-store demo that's maybe using some watercolor mediums, that's a good time to see that, because then you can try it with a demo artist and not feel like you're going to buy something. And then I don't want you from Winsor & Newton. Jackie doesn't want you to buy the wrong thing that's not right for your practice and be frustrated. I can tell you from 30 plus years as a painter, I get frustrated anyway. I don't need anything else to get in the way and frustrate me. I don't need it. I'm easily frustrated. So that's a great way. That's a great way to do that.
Someone is actually asking, out of the two, which would be best to try first if they were going to buy either one.
Yeah.
Is there one over the other to try? I guess it depends what you want to do.
It depends.
Right?
It does depend what you want to do, although, and this is a very general statement. So again, if I was speaking to any one of you face to face and we could have a discussion about what you're trying to do, I could be not so general. Generally, I find that when people try watercolor for the first time, they are trying to control it so much. Water does, I feel like a broken record to myself because I've said this so many times. Water does what water wants to do. If you've ever had a leak in your attic, you let that go, it's going to be in the basement at some point. Hopefully that's a long time, but water wants to go where it wants to go. I like to embrace that flow with watercolor, the beauty of that, and not to get all, what do I want to say, sort of out there about it, but I'm a control person, naturally. So I like to embrace watercolor and embrace the possibilities of, ooh, look at that bled together, and what a beautiful little combination of color that I did not expect. That can be beautiful. So the oxgall is what I would say. Masking fluid. Yeah.
So that's
okay.
The control.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's go back down here to my surface, and let's get down here. And one thing, I will show you masking fluid very quickly where I do. I'm just going to get back to this thing for a moment. This is what can happen if you get too thick with gouache. And let me just try to get that in focus. You can get little hairline cracks in there. Because again, remember, your gouache as compared to watercolor, we're packing more pigment in there to try to make up for that opacity or try to create that opacity, as opposed to putting some other opacifier in there. So when you have more of that pigment to our gum Arabic binder there, that makes it a bit more flexible. So just like I showed you with this, I'm going to show you, I think I have it here. Pardon me as I grab my little charts here that I have. Oh, I don't know if I do have it. Pardon me on that. Well, here's what you could do. Much in the same way, you could put a bit of gouache down, whatever you want. Let's say, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. You could put 10 spots of gouache down. And when you do that, put a next layer on the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and so on. Then come to the third, put a next layer, fourth, next layer. So you'll have successive, and you can see at what point do you start to lose that elasticity. So you can test that for yourself. That's a good way to do that. Yeah, masking fluid. So here's masking fluid. There's a few different, there's one that is non-removable. I don't have that one here in front of me, but we have colorless and we have a slightly tinted one here. And you might ask, why the version that I don't have in my hand non-removable? That could be because you absolutely know you want that to stay white and you're going to do nothing else with it. These two, what these will do is allow you to remove the masking fluid. And then if you want to put another layer over there, over that white area that you reveal, you can do that. So here's what I have here. I was doing this morning. Let me get these out of the way. I don't want those to get in our eyesight. So I put some masking fluid down here and here, and then I put a wash of color. So I put, I think I used a little bit of, no, it wasn't opera rose. It was an orange. I think it was the cadmium-free orange. And then I used an Indian yellow, and I let them bleed here. And I let it dry, of course, when I did that. And this is a latex-based product, so it's got a rubbery, right? It's a rubbery feel. So what I can do is I can peel it off, and it's sort of, you know what it feels like to me? It reminds me of like rubber cement in grade school that you might have used for projects. And you can easily peel that right off. So when would you want to do that? Could be a number of things. Maybe you're painting a portrait. It's that little, highlight on the eye. Maybe you're painting a scene that has a house, and instead of just a random line, these are your what would you call that? Within your railing, your posts within your railing, and you want that to be crisp. That's beautiful. Now let's do this. Let's actually apply some, because I want to show you a little trick in doing so. So I'm going to take my little enamel palette there, and then I'm going to dump a little bit of the masking fluid in there. Now I'm going to take this brush. This is what's known as a rigger. Almost looks like a brush, like a pinstriper's brush. And this is the professional watercolor synthetic sable that we just came out with recently. Now, I could dip it in here. The only problem is this latex masking fluid wants to grab to the hairs, and it can clog it up. I don't want that to happen. I don't want it to happen to you. So what could you do? You could use an old brush. That's fine. That's one option, right? The other thing that I like to do, I'm going to raise you back up here a little bit for this. I like to take a little bit of dish detergent right here. Now, what I'll do, I'm going to put it back down here. I'll just do this and kind of twirl my brush in it. Just like that. Now, I would never want to mix dish detergent with my paint, but remember, with my masking fluid, I'm peeling this off anyway. It's never going to mix with my paint. What I'm doing, I'm using that dish detergent sort of as a barrier. And then I can come in here and do this, and it's not on the fibers of the brush, it's on that soap, so I can make marks. I'd suggest if you're making marks, get a little thicker with your masking fluid. And the reason is that it's a little easier to peel off. And I can put this on there, and we'll let that dry, and then we'll put a wash over it. Now we could use any color, but I think what we'll do, we'll use French ultramarine. That's the color we're going to use, ultramarine. And it kind of makes me think of something here. Again, mentioned Gwartzman's, me. You can follow Winsor and Newton. If you sign up on Winsor and Newton for the newsletter, so I always learn things there, and I've been working for the company 15 years, and I'm like, wait, I thought I knew that. What we do in the newsletter is we do color stories. So I'm going to show you. Actually, I'm going to go back down here for a second. And so we'll do color stories sometimes on things like this. This is lapis. This is a isn't that beautiful?
It is.
Oh, this was worth its weight in gold back in the Renaissance. So this is the blue you would have seen in commissions by the church. People like Raphael might have used this in the robes of the Madonna. That's the Virgin Mary, not the material girl. For anybody, I'm dating myself now, Jackie. I'm dating myself. So we've got lapis. This would have been really tough to make a pigment out of, but it would have been quite beautiful. And what happened later on in the 1800s is there was a contest to make a synthetic version, and it was a French person named Goumet who came out with what was called French ultramarine. So why ultramarine? And this is kind of one of the geeky stories, one of the many that you can learn in the Winsor Newton newsletters. So this lapis would come from places to Northern Europe, from places like Afghanistan. So it was, if you break down the word ultramarine, Latin, ultra, it was beyond. And marine, or marinus in Latin, was the sea. It was from beyond the sea.
Wow.
So that, right. So I'm a guy, I love, is it etymology? Yeah, the origin of words, etymology. I love like getting into why do we say certain phrases or words. I'm always looking stuff up like that. And that's just a fun little one that always, so whenever you see that word ultramarine, it's from beyond the sea. That's where it came from.
That is
kind of fun stuff.
Cool.
Isn't it
that
fun?
Is so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll do all sorts, and I'll show you another one because this is sort of an iconic color for Winsor and Newton. I'm going to show you. Let's see. This is what's called rose madder. Let's get that in focus. Rose madder genuine. This is an iconic Winsor and Newton color, and it comes. And we have color stories on it. So the color stories in the newsletters, you can also find them on the website. Then they're housed there. This is a rose madder root. It's from the madder plant. And what always blows my mind about this is just, one of the things I think makes us unique as creatures. We're curious. So somebody, you look at this root and you don't think much of it, but somebody at one point saw, oh, there's this little broken part. Or maybe it rubbed against their skin, right? Maybe it did that.
Yeah.
And they realized, hey, what if we crush that up? And then we get that beautiful, gorgeous pink color. And let's lay a little bit of it out. I'm going to put a little bit, move my little masking fluid, which should be probably close to dry here. And I'm going to bring you folks down a little bit closer here. So this is a color that goes through quite a long process. It was developed by a colorman in the 1800s who was friends with the old Winsor and Newton boys, and his name was George Field. I'm going to take a bigger synthetic brush here, a flat, and it has many steps, and we still use the same recipe from him today. And sometimes in our newsletters, you'll find interesting things, and also on the Instagram, about the archives. So you get this beautiful rosy color. And I want to show you, I had given a talk to a botanical society a while ago. So, a lot of colors that we have in the range from carmine, rose madder, you see a lot of roses, rose madder, rose doré, rose Tyrian, Bengal rose, opera rose. Wait, permanent rose. You've got all the, and you might say, why so many rosy colors? I think a lot of that goes back to Winsor Newton history, the 1800s, with English botanical artists. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of artists still love, our colors today for some of these iconic ones in the range. But that's a beauty. And also, Jackie, while I'm down here, and then I'll come back up on screen and we'll answer some more questions. I want to actually flip this and just show everybody just kind of a few favorite mixtures of mine. Oh, I just made my lapis go splattering off to the side like I don't care about wealth. This is just kind of fun. This is cobalt blue deep and brown madder. I love this, Jackie. For anybody newer to watercolor, the cobalt blue deep and cobalt colors in general are what we call granulating colors. Their pigments settle in the hollows of the paper and they give this beautiful texture. And when you mix these two together, I just think about this as being, I don't know, maybe the shadow on a street scene. Something beautiful where instead of just black, what do we find? Oh, we find the beauty of blues and violets in the asphalt. And then perylene green and perylene violet can give you a nice mid-tone gray. The green and red complementary colors cancel each other out and give you that. And then I'll just show you, this is rose madder with Indian yellow, one of my favorites. I call it sunshine in a tube. And depending on the ratio here, I used a bit more rose madder. You can get a more muted orange. You can pump that up a bit more. And then also using Indian yellow with sap green, I can get this golden green. Now, sap green, if you look at the under tone to it, if you thin it out a bit, it already has a yellowish tone to it. So this can pump that up a bit more. And those are just, one more. I have to show you this because I just love it. Viridian, and there's our French ultramarine again. I've made myself a turquoise.
Wow.
Right. So here's the thing. It's super important, folks, to go back to what I was saying before and play with the colors on your palette because, okay, listen, I work for an art materials company. Jackie sells art materials. Sure, we want to sell art materials, but when you work in the art materials industry, you find that we're a very small group of people, and there's a lot of really wonderful professional people in this profession, in this industry. And I think overwhelmingly, what you'll find people say is start with a few key colors that make sense. And I can show you that if we have time, but start with a few key colors that make sense and really explore them to exploit their possibilities. And then you can purposely add in other colors. I've had interns in our office sometimes that look at the whole rack. It'd be like if they walked in the store, Jackie, and they'd say, oh, I would love to have it all. And I'd be like, I don't think you really would. If I gave you all 120 colors, you'd be so overwhelmed. And there'd be ones that you're like, I don't even really actually like that color. Yeah. So anyway, other questions that we have coming in, Jackie?
We do. We have a lot of questions coming in, and we've been trying to keep up with a lot of them. So somebody asked about if there's a way to prevent colors from being fugitive. And I think I know the answer on that. I don't believe there is, because of the pigment that it's made with that creates why it is fugitive.
Correct. And I'm pulling something off my studio wall, so I did not know this question was coming, but this happens to be there. Yeah, you're correct, Jackie. It is about the pigment itself. And just so I can get to other questions, I won't go back and forth here. I'll just show you this. What we do, the chemists do in the lab, they will test colors. So they'll put a color down and then they'll cover half of it and they'll put it in a light fast machine. And they want to make sure that the color doesn't change. And they do that for about, I think it's about 300 hours, which mimics 100 years in gallery or museum conditions. That can also be in your home. It's just stable conditions, not being hit with light all the time, just ambient. And obviously this is the side that would have been covered. What you'll notice here, this is a dye-based fluorescent color. Now we don't have any fluorescent colors in the watercolor range, but they are bright, they're beautiful, but they're based on dyes rather than the more stable pigments that we have here. And there can be relative changes in pigments as well. But I just want to show you something. This is actually this is something the lab did for me with our sister company, Liquitex, and our introductory or student range basics. This did not change at all. Nothing changed. So they go through these tests to ensure that. But yeah, if it's a fugitive color, it's a fugitive color. Avoid that if that's a concern.
Okay. And the other question was, do you have a recommendation? I mean, I know in our store we have a multitude of products that we recommend for someone, but someone is asking how to seal their watercolors.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say. I never like to speak to other brands because I can only speak to what I know from our brands and working with our chemists and everything. There are products out there. We don't make anything with Winsor & Newton. Generally speaking, what will happen with a watercolor and a gouache is you would mat it, and then frame it with your glass, because you don't want your glass sitting on the surface of the painting itself, because if any moisture built up in there, then you could have the things sticking together. You don't want that to happen. Right. But there are products. What do you have in store, Jackie?
Well, let me ask you a question. What about using any of the Winsor & Newton sprays that are available?
Okay, so you could use a fixative. You could use a spray varnish. The only thing I want to caution everybody about that is that, well, here's the thing. Generally speaking, with a varnish, you don't have to use a removable one, but for archival purposes, if you use a removable varnish, then you can often remove it with some sort of remover. A lot of times, a mineral spirits, mineral spirits or something like that, a varnish can be removed. However, as we know from talking about this today, watercolors are soluble, right? So not just soluble in water, soluble in anything wet.
Right.
So if you needed to remove that varnish later on because something happened to the surface of the painting, you would not be able to do that. Listen, if that's not a concern, if you don't think that's something you're worried about, then you could use a spray varnish. You wouldn't want to use a brush on varnish, because now you're brushing into it wet. And what I would highly suggest, if you were doing it, this is, pardon me as I reach down, this is old packaging. So I just happen to have this in my studio. The Winsor & Newton varnishes do not look like this anymore, but I would make sure it's really shaken well. I would make sure then you spray it on something like a piece of, brown cardboard, so you can see that the spray pattern is good before you do it. You don't want it spitting out. The only other thing I would caution about is what it could cause your watercolor and gouache to do is look darker than what you've actually, done. So if you're looking at your work and you're saying, oh, I like the way that looks, that's what be aware of that.
Okay. Now, I don't know if you can speak to it. Actually, someone's mentioning a product that we have had for a bazillion years. It seems to be becoming very popular with watercolor artists, and that's the wax mediums. Are you familiar with using that?
Not with watercolor, no. I am familiar. I used to use like a cold wax medium, a beeswax medium. I used to use that as my matting agent in mineral spirits for oil painting when I wanted a matte surface. My understanding is that you can rub that on the surface of watercolor paintings and give a seal to that without disrupting underneath, but I've never done it myself. And it's not, I'm not saying that to scare anybody away. It's not like I haven't done it because I've been concerned. It hasn't been part of my practice. So yeah.
Throwing it out there.
Yeah. So that might be a great alternative for folks.
As I say, we've been talking, we've probably sold some of those cold wax mediums for about 20 something years. And anyways, okay. There are so many people coming in, and I'm going to wave to say hi. Jimmy and I have been chatting about, I'm Jackie G, and I'm with Gortson's Art Supplies here in Toronto. And our guest has been Jimmy Leslie, and he's the demo artist extraordinaire with Winsor & Newton, and I'm sure some of you have seen him on the TFCNA, right?
Yeah, the Fine Art Collective North America at TFCNA. Yeah,
they have I follow them too. They are a wealth of information on anything you want to know. We were going to end for today because we've taken so much of Jimmy's time, and we really do appreciate it. I think this has been great. I hope you've all enjoyed it. for today. And I think we should do this again, Jimmy. It's been too long.
Oh, Jackie, I was just thinking part 2 maybe, because I'll tell you, there is so much more. Like, I have stuff all over here that I'm like, oh, I could show that. Oh, we could go on for a while.
So,
so
you know what we'll do? We're going to book a part 2.
Yeah, let's do that.
And that way everybody will know that we're going to join again sooner rather than later for part 2. So we're going to talk a little bit about the prize again for today, which is going to be part of the story after we finish. The question is, and so you're going to have to think about, and Jimmy, I'm going to be doing something special, so you may want to listen when I do this. This is my idea. My staff think I'm crazy, but that's okay. So the question is going to be, and am I allowed to give the question, guys? Okay. I'm checking with my staff so I don't mess it up. What is the Latin Greek translation of the watercolor, the definition of ultramarine? So if you don't remember, I'm going to play you something so that it might give you an idea. And also you'll have to listen to our live, go back and listen again to what Jimmy has been saying, aside from all the amazing tips that we have gotten today, which I learned something new, which I always think you know what, I don't know everything about art materials, which is wonderful. So I'm going to end on this. Thank you, Jimmy. We'll talk soon. And here we go.
I love it. I love it. Excellent.
My lover stands on golden sand and watches the ships that go sailing somewhere beyond the sea. She's there watching for me. If I could fly like birds on high, then straight to her arms I'd go sailing.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.
Cheers. Take care, everybody.